All right, let's dive into one of history's biggest questions. What really started the First World War? Because the answer, you think you know, it might not be the whole story.
It all seems to start with this one dramatic moment, right? A 19-year-old student, a royal archduke, and a couple of gunshots. The question that hangs over everything is, how did one single political assassination
Somehow lead to a war that swallowed the entire globe and ended up killing more than 20 million people? I mean, the scale is just staggering. It doesn't seem to add up.
And that's because it doesn't add up if you only look at the assassination. The truth is, the killing wasn't the cause. It was just the trigger. The best way to think about it is like this. The assassination was just the matchstick. Europe itself was a giant mountain of dynamite, just waiting for a spark.
So first things first, let's look at that spark. The actual story of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand is way more chaotic and, frankly, more of a fluke than you probably realize.
So get this, on June 28, 1914, the first attempt on the Archduke's life was a total bust. A bomb literally bounced right off his car. After all that chaos, Ferdinand, to his credit, decides to go visit the people who were injured in the hospital. But then, his driver takes a wrong turn. And by sheer unbelievable, you couldn't write this in a movie chance, the car stalls just 5 feet away from one of the assassins, Gavrilo Princip, who had basically given up and was getting a sandwich. This time, he didn't miss.
So why'd he do it? Well, at his trial, Princip made his motive crystal clear. This wasn't just about causing chaos. For him, it was about freedom. He wanted to unite all the South Slavic people, the Yugoslavs, and break them free from the control of the massive Austro-Hungarian Empire. And this right here, this introduces a key ingredient in our dynamite: nationalism. Okay, so we've seen the spark. Now let's talk about the fuel. To really get why everything exploded, you have to understand what Europe looked like in 1914. It was a continent on edge, and for good reason. People called it the power keg of Europe.
First, you got to forget the map of Europe you know today. Back then, it was dominated by these sprawling multi-ethnic empires, the Austro-Hungarian, the German, the Russian, and the fading Ottoman Empire. And these empires were all rivals, constantly competing for more land and more influence.
And the most explosive region of all? The Balkans, no question. This area, with countries like Serbia and Bosnia, was a hotbed of this South Slav nationalism. The people there shared a common identity, and they dreamed of having their own unified nation free from the empires that were ruling over them. Now, this fuse had been burning for decades. Austria-Hungary got control over Bosnia way back in 1878, and then in 1908, they just went ahead and officially annexed it. This made neighboring Serbia furious. They saw it as a direct threat to their fellow Slavs. Russia, which saw itself as the great protector of all Slavic people, backed Serbia up, but then ultimately had to back down. The anger, though, that resentment, it just kept simmering.
So you've got this regional conflict brewing, but how does that turn into a world war? Well, the answer lies in this tangled, messy web of secret alliances. It was a system that some ironically called the chain of friendship.
And this is where things just escalated at a terrifying speed. It was a perfect, unstoppable domino effect. After the assassination, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. So Russia, Serbia's ally, starts mobilizing its army. That causes Germany, who's allied with Austria-Hungary, to declare war on Russia. Well, that immediately pulls in Russia's ally France, and when Germany invades neutral Belgium to get to France, that's the last straw for Britain. One by one, the dominoes just fell.
So, if we pull back from the assassination and the dominoes, what was that dynamite actually made of? Well, historians generally agree on 4 major, long-term causes. And there's a pretty easy acronym to remember them: MAIN. So, MAIN stands for militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. We've already touched on alliances and nationalism, but let's start with militarism. This is the core belief that a country should have a super powerful military and be ready, even eager to use it.
And this wasn't just a philosophy. They were putting their money where their mouth was. Between 1870 and 1914, the combined military spending of Europe's great powers just exploded. It quadrupled. This wasn't for parades. This was a full-blown arms race. Everybody was preparing for a war they all saw as inevitable.
All this competition eventually solidified into 2 huge armed camps. On one side, you have the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. And on the other, you have the Triple Entente: Great Britain, France, and Russia.
Europe was basically split right down the middle, just waiting for a fight.
And here is a wild little fact that makes this whole thing seem even more absurd. King George V of Britain, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, and Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, they were all first cousins. The leaders of the main opposing empires were literally family.
Which brings us to a really crucial point. Was this a war that ordinary people actually wanted, or was it a war their rulers demanded? A lot of the evidence suggests it was a conflict between monarchs and empires, fought by ordinary guys who were just caught in the middle.
At the start of the war, propaganda was incredibly powerful. You had poems like this one by Rupert Brooke that made dying in battle seem like this beautiful, noble sacrifice for your country. And, it was really effective at getting young men to sign up.
But other writers saw right through it. Thomas Hardy wrote this piece imagining a soldier reflecting on the enemy he just killed. And he realizes, under any other circumstances, they probably would have just sat down and had a drink together. They were only enemies because they were told to be.
And the most powerful proof of this is the Christmas Truce of 1914. All along the Western Front, German and British soldiers just spontaneously laid down their guns. They crossed no man's land, they exchanged gifts, and they celebrated Christmas together. It's this incredible moment that shows the common soldiers really had very little hatred for each other.
So, in the end, the Great War wasn't just caused by one assassination. It was the predictable, and yet totally tragic, result of that one single spark igniting a mountain of fuel that had been piling up for decades. Militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. And that leaves us with a final and pretty sobering question to think about. When you look at the world around us right now, with all of its own tensions and alliances, what are the sparks, and more importantly, what's the fuel that we see piling up today?